Hello and welcome to the Camera Compendium Podcast, Episode 1. I'm recording today, September 14th, 2023. Today I'm going to be talking about TLRs, twin lens reflexes, what they are, what they're used for, and why you should get one. Stay tuned. So, I'm going to be talking about, like I just said, twin lens reflexes. I have a number of them next to me, and I'm going to go through various points about them, what they are, first of all, what they're used for, and, like I said, why you should get one, or two, or three, or more. So, I'm going to start off at the beginning of all this, the very first TLRs. The TLR concept was pioneered in the mid-19th century, and mind you, remember they're using basically only large format at that time. So the first twin lens reflex camera was ostensibly a large format camera. It used wet plates, and I believe it was created by a British gentleman, British photographer, and the intent of it is, well, I should explain what it is first. A twin lens reflex is just that. It's a twin lens reflex camera. It's a reflex camera, which means it employs a mirror in its viewfinding abilities, and twin lens, meaning it has two lenses on the front. And twin rather than two lens, because twins, they're kind of related to each other. Twin lenses are focused equally to each other. So if one's in focus, the other one will be in focus. So a TLR camera has the advantage of being able to see your focus, and if you're wide open, the lens, your depth of field, without having a complex slapping mirror mechanism like a single lens reflex or SLR camera would have. So they're a bit more primitive, but there are several reasons why they're superior in some aspects, and several reasons why you should get one. Anyway, so the first TLR was invented, of course, as a large format camera, and it was made of wood, had a big view screen on the top. It was basically a regular view camera, but the screen was transplanted from the back of the camera to the top of the camera, and it would be focused in much the same way that a normal large format camera would be focused of the day. However, the image will be viewed from the top of the camera rather than the back. And that's, it's particular use because you don't need to remove the viewing screen to actually put the plate in when you're taking wet plate photographs. Because, as you might know already, the viewing screen takes place of the plate holder in a view camera. But if you can transplant that screen to a different location, and remember you're using a different lens, so the optical path of the taking lens is not occluded by the view screen, you can keep the plate in place and keep the view screen in place the entire time. So that's the main advantage of that. So the thing is, this first TLR never really gained steam. It never gained traction. So it really, nobody made them back in the day. It was kind of ahead of its time, I would say. So this concept sort of died down for a number of decades, and there were a number of German manufacturers, German camera manufacturers, the most notable of which is Franke und Heidecke out of Braunschweig or Brunswick, Germany, which is in the north of Germany. They were making a stereoscopic camera, so a camera with two lenses, but both of them take photographs about, I'd say, about 3 inches away from each other, center to center, about the same as would be the human eyes. And the object of that would be, of course, to take a stereoscopic photograph that would show depth when viewed through a stereoscope. Anyway, so this camera was called the Heidescope camera, and it took little plates of film or in the back of it, and there would be a reflex viewing screen because it had 3 lenses on the front of the camera, 2 that were taking the photographs, and of course 1 for viewing. This camera was updated to use roll film, and the name was changed to Rolleidoscope. So for the roll that it's now using, instead of a plate, the Rolleidoscope, it got that new name, and that's the first instance of the Rollei name being used. So the engineers at Franke and Heidecke went, hey, wait a second, this film that we're using in this camera would be kind of neat, if we can shrink this camera down to take non-stereoscopic images and just single square format images, and you could have this really neat form factor, like this nice camera, compact, that could take very high quality photographs. So they modify that into what is called the Rolleiflex. Yes, that's the famous Rolleiflex. The Rolleiflex original, or the Rolleiflex K1, as it's referred to retroactively, debuted in 1928, I have one in my hands that I'm holding right here. I know you can't see it, but I'm holding it. This one was manufactured in 1930. It is the original version, and oh boy, I can tell this is yeah, definitely primitive. If you've held newer TLRs, this thing is real sketchy in some respects. Um, but anyway, the thing is, you have a few obstacles um, still in 1928 if you want to make a TLR like this. The first and most blatant of them is the film. Now, most twin lens reflex cameras use 120 film, or Eastman number 120 film, marketed for a while in Europe as B2 film. It's the same thing, just a different name. And usually, you buy a roll of 120 nowadays, and it has 3 sets of markings on it. One for 2¼ by 3¼ images, which is the original format. They debuted with the 120 format in 1901 with the number 2 Brownie, the Kodak number 2 Brownie, or Eastman number 2 Brownie, I should say. There's the 6x6 or 2¼ by 2¼ markings, which are in the center of the film, which were added later on. The initial format did not actually have that. The initial 120 rolls only had markings for 2¼ by 3¼ 6 by 9 centimeter exposures. And then later on, even more, once the Kodak Duo came out, the Duo and the Duo X, those are two 6 by 4½ centimeter format cameras, and they added a third set of numbers to the backing paper of that film. So anyway, the 6x6 numbers were only added in, I believe, the 1930s. I'll have to fact check that, but certainly did not exist in the 20s, I can tell you that. Now, this Rolleiflex came out in the 1920s. So there's a problem there. How are you going to get a square format image? Because, of course, TLRs usually use a 6x6 or 2¼ by 2¼ frame size. That's just the what the convention is for them to be. How are you going to get that if you don't have numbers on the backing paper for 6x6? Well, they didn't use 120. That was the answer. You see, the original Brownie of 1900, the Eastman Kodak Brownie, or retroactively named the Brownie number 1, took 2¼ by 2¼ inch negatives on roll film. That camera did not use number 120 film. That used number 117 film. It's the same width. It is 60 millimeters wide, and it came on slightly different spools than 120, but thinner, and each roll of that would only contain 6 2¼ by 2¼ inch negatives, or space for that. But most importantly, the numbering was directly in the center of the film, and it was meant for that square format. So, the engineers at Rollei saw that Kodak was still making this film, and thought to themselves, wait a second, we can actually employ that square format, which is nice and convenient, in our new camera. So that's just what they did. The Rolleiflex K1 does not use 120 film. It uses number 117 film. So it has a red window, or ruby window, directly in the back of the camera, like just about, all lower level TLRs of later years would have. However, the thing is, the internal space of it is not large enough to accommodate a 120 spool. So eventually, when they made 120 6x6 or 2¼ by 2¼ compatible, you could not actually modify easily the Rolleiflex to use 120 film. So, how do I use this camera now? Because I have used this camera, this K1 Rolleiflex, before. Well, there actually is an answer to that. In 1932, Kodak came out with a new film format called number 620 film, or 620 film. It is the exact same film, exact same backing paper as number 120 roll film. However, the spool is metallic and a bit slimmer, and the winding spades are a bit smaller as well, in addition. So, the thing is, the important part is it has, of course, the numbers for 2¼ by 2¼ on the backing paper. It takes 12 of those on a roll, but, like I just mentioned, the spool is thinner, and that actually allows you to be able to put a 620 spool into the camera. Mine here, my 1930 production one, if I open it, I can look at it, has been modified for use with number 620 roll film. So I'm just able to, now even though number 620 film is no longer made, like I said, it's the exact same film as 120. So you could take 120 film, and in a dark room, completely darkened room, or a changing bag, you can actually put this 120 film and backing paper onto the 620 spools. They're metal, so they're infinitely reusable. So that's what I've done. And yeah, I'm able to get use out of this camera. It's, like I said, it's horrendously primitive compared to later ones. However, I really dig that. I think that's a positive, actually. Mine here has a 75 millimeter, excuse me, 7.5 centimeter. Yeah, I know it means the same thing, but semantics. F3.8 Carl Zeiss Jena Tessar lens, mounted in a rimset Compere shutter. That's the taking lens. The viewing lens is a Hydroscope and Astigmat 7.5 centimeter f3.1 lens. Like I said, those two are linked together in focus. Now, the unique thing about some of these earlier TLRs is that the viewing screen actually incorporates a little spirit level into them. There's a little bullseye level that is cemented into the viewing screen, the ground glass viewing screen on the top. And that is actually pretty neat because it allows you to hold the camera level because, of course, it's a square format. You want to make sure that all your verticals are level. Well, I guess any photograph you want to make sure all your verticals are level. So you want to use that spirit level to just do that. You level out the camera. In addition, I did what a number of photographers did back in the day. I removed the ground glass and added some fifths lines in pencil, dividing the frame up into 5x5 grid squares. And of course, it's pencil. You can remove that at a later date if I so choose. So it's a non-destructive process that I did. But I know a lot of photographers did that back in the day. Just, again, helps you to line up geometric features of your frame with the viewing screen. So, yeah, this Rolleiflex, it takes really nice photographs. It's a pre-war uncoated Tessar. It has a look to it. It certainly has that 1930 look to it. And yes, it's a bit ornery in its operation. Its focusing loop on top, which helps you get focus on the ground glass, is a bit, dare I say, flimsy. The sports finder, if you could even call it that, which is intended to help you get eye level viewing rather than waist level viewing, as with the normal TLR configuration, is horrendous. And it really is just horrendous, because what you do is you flip up the magnifier and it reveals a cutout in the back leaf of the viewfinder shade. And inside of the top of the viewfinder is a mirror, a silvered piece of metal, and that just reflects your view down to the ground glass. And it's terrible because you have a laterally reversed image that's also vertically reversed and super dim. So good luck trying to follow any fast action with that. I think it's a frivolous feature that should not have been added. But hey, it's there. It's cool that it was added. So whatever. But yeah, that's the Rolleiflex K1. It's certainly a nice camera. It really is. I would recommend getting one if you're really into the history of it. However, if you want to go shooting, it's kind of it's too. It has a flavor to it. It's too flavored for its own good. You know, it's a neat collectible. It's neat that I can use it, and I do use it every once in a while because it just has this weird flavor to it that I like. However, it's very idiosyncratic for day-to-day use. The next camera I'll talk about is another Rolleiflex that I have here. I'll take the lens cap off of that. This is the Rolleiflex K4A. This one was produced in the early 1950s. If I remember correctly, mine is from, actually I can give you an exact figure on that. Mine is from 1951. Mine was made. It's a Rolleiflex Automat K4A. This is unequivocally the successor of the previous camera that I just mentioned. This was one of Rollei's nicer offerings back in the day. The Automat series was just, it's a really nice, well laid out series of camera. It has a crank wind rather than a knob wind, and also automatic frame spacing. Remember I said the K1 has a ruby window in the back, so you have manual frame spacing. You have to wind on the film manually and stop at each number with a knob. It's kind of, it gets grating on you after a while. It's fine. I mean, honestly, if you're not doing any fast action, it's perfectly fine. It's kind of leisurely. It's kind of relaxing. However, if you're doing fast action, if you're doing press work, it's really nice to actually have an automatic frame spacing. So this K4A does have automatic frame spacing. It's a crank advance on the side. This one here has a synchro Compere shutter with speeds from 1 second to 1/500th of a second plus bulb. And the taking lens is a Schneider-Kreuznach Xenar lens, 75mm f3.5, and it is coated. The K1 lens, being pre-war, of course, is uncoated. And the viewing lens on this is a high dosmat 75mm f2.8 lens. Very clear, very bright. And that's also helped by the fact that the viewing screen on this actually has um, Fresnel striations in it, which really helps brighten up the entire screen. It's really nice. This camera has a very bright, clear view through it, whereas the K1, of course, it's primitive. It's the first one that was ever made, first model that was ever made. So of course it's going to be dark. But yeah, this K4A is it's a really nice improvement. The release, instead of being on the shutter can itself, is built into the front standard. It's a nice button that you get to press. It has a nice shutter lock. And also the shutter cocks when you wind the film on, where you have to manually cock the shutter on the K1. But yeah, this Rolleiflex, if you've ever seen a picture of a Rolleiflex, the K4A is one of those ones that's really iconic. It just has that classic TLR look for it. Has that really TLR look to it, with the dials for setting the aperture and shutter speed on the front. It's real neat. They fixed the sports finder problem on it. This one, you flip up the loop and then you put down a little flap in the front, and that does two things. One, it opens up a square opening in the front of the camera, which is your viewing frame, but also there's a mirror on the bottom of that, and there's a magnifying loop on the back viewfinder leaf. Yeah, and that allows you to do both eye-level focusing, which is, of course, laterally and vertically reversed, which doesn't matter if you're focusing, but also eye-level viewing with a frame finder. It's nice and clear, always in focus because it's your eye. There's no optics, and reasonably precise. It honestly is. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously. You don't want to use it for macro, certainly. But you know what? It's more than sufficient for what it does. Now, another thing that was added to this Rolleiflex was parallax correction. Now, I want to mention that because single lens reflex cameras, of course, looking through the taking lens always, do not have an issue with parallax, viewfinder parallax. A twin lens reflex camera always has an issue with parallax, and that's simply because the two lenses are not mounted coaxially. So you need to compensate for that. So the closer you focus, you want to aim a little bit further down. Now the Rolleiflex has a little mask in the viewfinder that moves up and down, and it just helps with centering any close-up photos that you're going to take. It's real neat. Yeah, so this it has a knob focus on the side, just like the K1. I should have mentioned that earlier. But yeah. Oh, and of course, perhaps most importantly, this K4A uses 120 film. You load it in, and you load it through these rollers, the backing paper, and when the film starts on the backing paper, those rollers kind of move apart just a trifle, and it engages the film counter. And if it works, it's pretty neat, but it can really get gummed up sometimes, and I don't know, honestly, if it's worth the hassle of doing that. So, in all honesty, I don't really shoot with the Rolleiflex K4 much. It's very nice. I have shot a few rolls through it. I really do admit that, if you like this camera, honestly, you could choose a lot worse. It really is a nice camera, and it just feels gorgeous when you wind it, when you press the shutter. It's very well put together. I'm going to make a quick mention of a few more cameras, and then we're going to go into other ones that I have here. In my collection, I also have a few, I would say, Rollei copies. The most prominent of them is, I would say, the Yashica mat. Mine is a Yashica mat EM, and the EM stands for exposure meter. It just has a little selenium meter on the top with a small exposure calculator. It helps with getting the exposure correct in your frames. That is really, I would say, a copy and competitor, certainly, of the Rolleiflex. Mine is from 1964, if I remember correctly. That's manufacture. 1965, excuse me. It has the knob wind, the dial set of the settings, the front shutter release, etc., etc., etc. It has most of the features of the Rolleiflex K4 that I just described. However, if you feel the two side by side, I mean, if you feel the Yashica in a vacuum, it feels really nice. It really does. The lens on that is a Yashinon lens. It's a Tessar design, if I remember correctly. The Tessar, of course, of the Rolleiflex K1 is a Tessar. The Xenar of the Rolleiflex K4A is also a Tessar type, and the Yashinon, if I remember correctly, is also a Tessar type. So the lenses are very comparable. So anyway, the Yashica camera feels very well made, I will admit. However, you feel it next to a Rolleiflex automat, it really just feels cheap. The winding is a bit coarse. Um, the shutter is not as smooth feeling, and just the handling of it is not as ideal. It really isn't. You can get them for much cheaper than a Rollei, I will admit that. But honestly, you get what you pay for. Having both, I will say that the Rollei is, if you can spare the money, I would go with the Rollei. I really would. The Ashenon lens also doesn't really have as much character as the Schneider lens or the Carl Zeiss lens. Um, it's a perfectly sharp lens. It's a very nice lens objectively. It just doesn't have character, which I like having character in my photos. So it's not really for me. The next one I want to talk about is actually I'll talk about that one in a second. First, I'll mention the Rolleiflex's little brother, the Rollei Cord. Now, in 1933, Rollei was realizing, oh wait, we're selling a lot of these Rolleiflex cameras. These are very popular. However, of course, as they would be for decades, they come at a very, very, very high price point. Not everybody could afford that, so that was kind of an issue. They wanted to sell to not exactly amateurs, but people who wanted a nice camera, even professionals, right? But they couldn't afford, nor did they want to spend the money for the full Rolleiflex. Or perhaps they didn't need all the features of the full Rolleiflex, honestly. So they wanted to make a slightly lower offering, and they called that the Rollei Cord. The Rollei Cord is, again, very similar form factor to the Rolleiflex. You know, obviously it's a TLR, that's what we're talking about today. I have two of them. One is a Rollei Cord 1A. That's from 1936, and the other one, I have actually three technically, but the other two I have are the same model. Rollei Cord 2Bs, both from 1939. I'll talk about the 1A first. Now, the 1A is a very nice camera. It's very neat to handle. For professional work, I can start to see why it's not the best. I have shot press photographs with that, even indoors with 100 speed film. So, don't. It's not very limiting, but you know sometimes you can see features that the higher end models do better, and I'll get to that in a second. But it has lower end lenses. Like the 1A has a Triotar 75mm f4.5 lens on it, and the shutter is manually cocked on the front. Instead of having a little button on the front like the Rolleiflex models typically do, it's a little lever on the bottom of the shutter can. You move it one way to cock the shutter, and you move it the other way to fire it. I actually prefer that method over the Rolleiflex because I like not having tension on the shutter all the time. I like to only cock it right before I take the photograph. And also, I just find it less jarring to the camera when you move the lever sideways rather than pressing a button into the front standard. But that Triotar lens is very nice. It has beautiful character to it, nice bokeh to it, very smooth and tremendously sharp when focused properly. It's a very nice lens. It's made by Carl Zeiss, mounted in a regular rim set Compure shutter, and there are no dials to set the aperture and shutter speed. It's rim set and a little pointer like that of many other cameras of the era. The sports finder on that one is similar to that of the Rolleiflex K1. It's that stupid mirror design. It's a little bit refined, I will admit, but you honestly you don't want to use it. It's pretty terrible. But yeah, it's knob wind, unlike the Rolleiflex Automat, which I actually prefer. I like the knob wind over the crank wind. There's less to go wrong, but it does have automatic frame spacing. You put the film in. There's a little red window on the bottom because remember I said at this point they still did not have numbering for 6x6 frames on 120. So this frame counter was actually a bit of a necessity because it gave you 6x6 spacing on 120 before you had numbers, 6x6 numbers. So there's a little red window with a little shutter on the bottom of the camera, and you'd open that shutter, looking through that red window. You'd move your film with the knob up to the number 1. Now that number 1 is there for the 6x9 frames, the 2.25 by 3.25 frames. So that just signifies that you've reached the beginning of the film. You close that shutter, you press the little film advance button on the side of the knob, you flick a little button on the side of the camera, and then click that frame counter, resets itself, and you are good for the whole roll. And it'll stop at each frame each time you press the button on the side of the knob to unlock it. You press the button, you wind on, and it automatically stops. It's a really neat system. Very smooth, delightful to use. Now, the Rollei Cord 2B is tremendously similar in operation. It's a very similar camera in all honesty. However, being a higher number, it's a higher end camera. The lens that I have on both of mine is, again, the 75mm f3.5 Xenar from Schneider Kreuznach. And guess what? It looks exactly like the lens on the Rolleiflex K4A that I have. Except it's not coated, but I don't really mind. The shutter and aperture on those are set by two levers on the side of the shutter housing. It does have a shutter housing, but it's the same regular Compeer shutter as the earlier, the 1A. Again, not too much I can say on the 2B. It's a very nice camera, it really is. And I would say that's the nicest balance between a full-on Rolleiflex and the lower-end Rollei cords. So, next camera. Another one of these import knockoffs, I would like to call them, of the Rolleiflex. This one is the Minolta Auto Cord, and I have this one again right in front of me here. This camera here, mine here, was manufactured in 1958. This camera is, in my opinion, a cross between a Rolleiflex and a Rollei Cord. So it's kind of it strikes a weird balance in the market. It has a crank advance like a Rolleiflex. However, it's not as refined, I would say, as a Rolleiflex would be. It does have the front-mounted shutter release like the Rolleiflex, but the main weirdness that most autocord users would say it has is the focusing mechanism. All of TLRs I've mentioned previously have had a knob on the side of the body that you use to focus. The Minolta Autocord has a little lever on the bottom of the front of the camera, and you move that from side to side, and that points to a focusing scale, and that moves the front standard forward and back. Some people find that to be quicker and more ergonomic. Personally, I don't really like it. In all honesty, I don't really like the way that the entire autocord is set up. It's kind of finicky and weird. Now, full disclosure, I haven't used this autocord yet. I will in the near future. And I have good expectations for it because Minolta makes good glass. The taking lens on this is a Rockor 75mm f3.5 coated, and the taking lens is a View Rockor 75 f3.2. The view screen on this opens just like the Rolleiflex, and it has the standard frame finder, sports finder as the rest of them. Nothing new. It does have a cold shoe on the side for mounting flash. It has a PC sync on the front. And again, when you wind this one, just like the Yashica mat, it doesn't feel as refined as the Rolleis, as the German models. And of course, has a frame counter, being a crank advanced camera. The Yashica mat and the Minolta Autocord here, when you load the film, there's a double-headed arrow on the backing paper of the 120 film when you're loading it. And there's these little registration marks on the interior of the camera when you're loading it. They're typically red. You want to align those arrows with those dots, and then you close the back. And then that engages the film counter. So from then on, you just wind, and the camera automatically advances and stops at the, when you're cranking it, at the first frame. So that is probably a better way to get around that, more mechanically robust, I should say, than the way that the K4A does it with the film feelers. So, meh. So I don't really want to make many more statements on the autocord because, again, I haven't really used it. Alright, next. So, I've been talking a lot about Rollei, or Franca and Heidecke, I should say, and the different Rollei cameras. Like I said, I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, and they're all very well made. However, I do have a number of other German TLRs, and really, I'd say the only TLR out of all of the ones in my collection that I would say comes close to, or equals, I should say, the quality of the top-of-the-line Rolleiflexes is the Zeiss Icon EcoFlex, and I have one right here. Now, the EcoFlex was introduced after the engineers at Zeiss Icon, out of Dresden, Germany, saw the Rollei series, the Rollei Cords and Rolleiflexes, and they noticed that they were taking foothold in the market. Now, Zeiss Ikon is this massive conglomerate company out of Germany, and they make very, very, very high quality cameras and delightful to use. Great optics, of course. It's Zeiss. They all use Carl Zeiss optics. And anyway, Zeiss Ikon decided to come out with their own line of TLRs, and that was the EcoFlex line. So the first ones that came out were a bit primitive. I won't go into a lot of detail here because if I go into detail too much about any of this, this is going to be a 5-hour long talk, and I honestly don't want to record that, nor edit that, nor would you like to listen to that. But I digress. The first EcoFlexes that came out were very similar in functionality to the Rolei cords. A lot of them had red window advance, pretty non-advanced shutters, but they were of high quality, relatively speaking, and people bought them. They weren't really professional, but people bought them. And then Zeiss went, you know what, there might be something to this. So they started manufacturing higher quality EcoFlexes. They started out with the retroactively named EcoFlex.1, and then they started to make EcoFlex.2, which is a higher quality camera, nicer shutter, nicer lens, better handling, more suited to what a higher end amateur would be needing, and those sold well again. So then they came out with the EcoFlex 3. Now, this is going to get confusing in a second, but bear with me. The camera I have in front of me is an EcoFlex 3. It was manufactured in 1938. The taking lens is a Carl Zeiss Jena Tessar 7535. Yay, just like the other ones, uncoated. And the viewing lens is a Terranar and a Stigmat 75 f3.5. This is a beautiful camera to behold. It really is. When you carry this around, it's a fashion statement. It's gorgeous. It's chrome and black, and just honestly, if you looked at this, you'd think it's from 20 years after this was actually manufactured. It was so ahead of its time. And it really does come close to maybe even beating the quality of the Rolei Flex. It's very, very nicely made. Very nice tolerances, beautiful, silky. Anyway, it has knob focus on the side. A much shorter focus throw because it uses a different focus mechanism than the Roleis. It has knob advance on the side with an automatic frame counter, which is, in my opinion, always excellent. The front of the camera has 2 levers on it and 2 displays, and those set the shutter and aperture speeds. They're very quick to actually adjust. And on the bottom of the shutter is the little lever to actually manually cock the shutter. And like I explained earlier, that's a bonus in my opinion, because I like to only cock the shutter right before I take the image so I don't wear out the shutter springs. The shutter advance is noticeably lacking from the front of the camera. It is actually on the top of the camera. That's my one qualm with this model. It's a bit not ergonomic. It's a bit strange to hold. The Roleis are much easier to trigger. And yeah, I don't know what I feel about this. I don't really like it. But you know what? It's a good camera. I use it anyway. So the view screen on this is naturally very bright, very clear. It's a really nice screen to behold. Very big and bright focusing loop on the top, and frame sports finder. Again, just overall very nice build quality. But anyway, that's just this model. So after this, 1 year after this, 1939, they came out with the EcoFlex 3. But wait a minute, didn't I just say this is the EcoFlex 3? Well, here's where the German shenanigans come in. Zeiss Ikon realized that the early EcoFlexes they made, they discontinued those, and they had the EcoFlex 1, 2, and 3, and they realized since they discontinued those, there's kind of a mismatch in the way that they're naming the cameras. So they bumped the previous EcoFlex 2s down to EcoFlex 1s. The EcoFlex 3 became the EcoFlex 2, and the new EcoFlex 3 became the EcoFlex 3. So here's the confusing part. When this camera that I'm holding was manufactured, it was an EcoFlex 3, and I refer to it as an EcoFlex 3 because of that. Once the newer EcoFlex 3 came out, which was very, very similar in layout to the Rolei Flex, however, very visually different and very striking. It's, again, very ahead of its time. Gorgeous camera. Zeiss made very beautiful cameras. But what I'm saying is, when that one came out, they bumped this one down to the EcoFlex 2, which I don't know how I feel about that. But anyway, that's only my opinion. So the next camera I want to talk about, I don't currently have with me here. It's at home, this is my home, but different home. It's a Velta Reflecta, Reflecta 1 to be honest. And that was made by Velta, like I just said, in East Germany in the 1950s. 1949 mine was made. And that is a very cheap export model. I believe it was sold through a camera retailer in East Germany. I got that one from a good friend of mine. And I know for a fact, from anecdotal evidence, that that camera actually passed through Checkpoint Charlie during the Cold War. So that's pretty neat. But anyway, that camera has a really, really cheap Blitz 1 shutter, I believe it is, and a cheap Ernst Ludwig Werk Meritar lens. It's a 75mm Meritar lens. However, that lens is very sharp. It has a focusing lever just like the Minolta does. Again, I don't know how I feel about that, but I put up with it. And no sports finder, no frills. It's a red window advance with a knob. Honestly, I'm going too long about it. It's a very simple camera. If you could find one in good condition, I would say get it. It's fun, but you really don't want to do professional work on it. So, this brings me to my favorite part of the TLRs, the American TLRs. The American camera industry used to be quite sizable. Most of the cameras sold in America used to be made in America, and that very much includes the twin lens reflex. There were only a few twin lens reflexes made in America, though. I won't be going over a lot of them. They range from really cheap pseudo TLRs, which don't focus at all, which is why they're called pseudo TLRs, all the way up to the very nice Ansco automatic reflex of just post World War II. I don't have one of those, but I wish I did. Well, anyway, I'll cut to the chase. I'll go over my models. I have 3 American TLRs. The first 2 are made by Argus in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The first one is what I believe to be the first American TLR, if I recall correctly, the Argaflex E. Now, this is a cool camera because it can take both 120 and 620 film. Lots of cameras in America that took that size film during that time period only took 620 film. However, Argus was smart and they put a stepped winding spade in it so it could take actually both formats, which is infinitely more useful to a modern photographer. So this camera is made of Bakelite to cut costs, because Argus, they made really robust cameras, but they also were very adept in Bakelite manufacturing. This camera has a Wollensak Alphax shutter in the front. It's a quite nice shutter for what it is. It kind of, when you trip the shutter, it kind of shakes it a bit because it is an Everset shutter, but if you get used to it, it's fine. Anyway, the taking lens on that is made by Wollensak. It is a Varex lens, 75mm f4.5. That thing is stupidly sharp. And when I've taken some portraits on it, beautiful character in the background, the out of focus areas when wide open. It is a truly great lens. No name sort of viewing lens. But the cool part about this camera is it is what's called a geared lens TLR. So the taking lens and the viewing lens rotate, and they have teeth on the outside of them, and they kind of mesh with each other. So you actually twist the front of the lens, and it unscrews and screws the lens, and both of them unscrew and screw at the same rate, and focuses, concurrently. So that's a much cheaper, easier way, and somewhat more robust in some respects, to manufacture a focusing mechanism for a twin lens reflex. Now the viewing screen on that is insanely dark as well, because there's no fancy shenanigans going on with that. It's just a piece of ground glass. It does have a nice sports finder, I will admit. And yeah, it's just a really nice camera all around. It looks pretty neat too. Mine was manufactured in, what was it, 1940, let's look it up, 1940, yeah, 1940 exactly. So that's the first year of production. So I have a TLR from the first production year of American TLRs. That's pretty neat. So the next camera I mentioned is the Argaflex EF. Now this one was manufactured in 1950, so 10 years after the other one. It's made of one billet of solid cast aluminum. This camera is a tank. You could probably assault somebody physically with it, and the camera would shrug it off. Now it has the same Varex lens, except this is coated now. This lens is also, again, stupidly sharp. I don't know what they did to it to make it like that, and really nice contrast. In operation, the camera is identical. It looks a bit different, but identical operation. However, this camera can only take 620 film, which is kind of a bummer, but You know what? Like I said, you can always re-spool 120. It's fine. Same Alphax shutter. Again, really nice camera. It's gorgeous. I always get comments on the camera when I'm carrying it around. It's just a beautiful, timeless mid-century, but very simple design. Truly, truly a paragon of camera design. Anyway, next. The next camera I have here is probably my favorite twin lens reflex. Now, you may or may not have heard of it because they were popular for only a short amount of time, but it has the absolute sharpest lens I have ever seen on any camera in my collection. And I have over 200 cameras in my collection, so that's saying a lot. It is the Ciroflex. Now, these cameras were made in Delaware, Ohio, and mine dates from 1950. It's a Model C. It is made of stamped steel. It is kind of bigger than these other TLRs. Don't know why. It's probably due to the fact that it's made of stamped steel rather than anything machined. I don't really mind it. But anyway, the lens on this thing is a Wollensak and Astigmat 85mm f3.5. It is crazy sharp. And I mean crazy, crazy, crazy sharp. Excellent for portraiture as well. When I need to take a portrait session of somebody, I always bring the Ciroflex. This thing is just, it punches way above its weight. It really does. The taking lens on this is unlabeled, but undoubtedly Wollensak again. The shutter on this is a Rapax shutter, rim set with times of 1 second to 1/400th of a second. And again, really nice shutter. You cock it and fire it on the front. Really nice levers. This thing is a very well put together camera. On the side now, it has a knob wind. It does only have a red window advance. It does not have a frame counter, which is, I guess, my only real qualm with this camera. Otherwise, it's great. It does have a little shutter on the back for the red window, so you don't expose your panchromatic film, which is always useful. But yeah, it has a knob focus on the side. Very smooth, very nice to actuate, and it focuses all the way down at 3 feet, which is real neat. Some of the models have flash sync, but it's for bulb and it has the old American Standards Association ASA bayonet connector, which is not too available today, so you don't really want to use those. But anyway, standard sports finder, frame finder. The viewing screen on this is decently bright. Not the brightest, but decently bright. And again, the main feature of this camera is the lens. This thing, I cannot even begin to tell you the performance I've gotten out of this lens. Is it just my copy? I have no clue. However, I just know that this camera and this lens will produce absolutely unequivocal results in any camera that's in my collection. So I really like the Ciroflex. It's a beautiful camera. So that was a tour of some of the TLRs that I have in my collection. Let me go over now why you should get one. Now this is a bit editorial, I admit, so if you want to tune out now, by all means do. But I just want to give you a little spiel of why you should get a TLR. Now, first of all, they're lots of fun. They just really are. You pick one up, and something about looking down into the view screen and just cradling it in your hands, having the strap go around your neck, and just seamlessly go into this nice taking position. You just hold it and you go, wow, I want to shoot with this camera. It's just something to behold in your hands, really. And that really goes with most of the TLRs that I have. I mean, maybe not the cheaper ones, not the Velta really as much. But, I mean, certainly something like the Ciroflex or the EcoFlex. I just finished a roll on the EcoFlex. I can't wait to develop that. They just really beg you to go out shooting. And another reason, if you're kind of, like this, and very shallow, I don't want to say that in a bad way, but kind of shallow, they make good fashion accessories. Like I said, the EcoFlex is just, it's stunning. It's a gorgeous camera. And, the camera around your neck, I always go everywhere in public with a camera. I never want to miss a moment. And just this past week, I've been going around with the EcoFlex around my neck. And, all my friends always know that I always have a camera with me, so they always expect me to have a camera around my neck. And just having the EcoFlex around on my shoulder, it's just a gorgeous camera. It's beautiful. I don't mean to sound rambly on this, but, well, I'm already rambly, so yay. Anyway, if you're kind of shallow, and again, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, they do look good as a fashion statement. Not to say that you should use the camera only as a fashion statement. I say you should be using the camera as a camera first and foremost. Do what works for you. Next, TLRs are great for sports. They really are. I have done a lot of press photography in my photographic career, and a lot of that has to do with sports. I've shot hockey for a few years now. I've done football, soccer, volleyball, and more. Um, and there's a distinct advantage that TLRs have. They have reflex focusing, so you can just put your eye up to the loop and just continually focus. Again, these are all manual focus, of course. Um, and you can continually focus. However, an SLR, where you could also be continually focusing, has a mirror. And unless it's a special mirror, like a pellicle mirror, like the Canon Pellex or whatever, um, the mirror has to slap up before the exposure can be made. Now, two things happen in that instant. One, you miss the exact instant that you press the shutter. Like let me rephrase that. When you press the shutter button, the shutter doesn't trip instantly. The mirror has to slap up before the shutter is tripped, so that you miss that fraction of a second. Now, when you're doing hockey, which is a very, very fast sport, that really does matter. And also, the viewfinder will black out during the exposure, which makes it harder to track motion. A TLR doesn't have either one of those issues, so that's why I shot with a TLR. I shot hockey for years with one. Uh, Another thing is the lenses on these TLRs tend to be, this is a circumstantial thing, but the lenses on these TLRs tend to be very high quality and just have beautiful character to them. Again, a lot of these cameras date from the golden age of lens design, so a lot of these lenses they're just simple enough that they have beautiful character to them. And when you, in the out of focus areas, they have very nice bokeh. Beautiful for portraits. I love TLRs for portraits. And again, just the form factor, very ergonomic. I love them. So there are several other reasons, but again, I don't want to bore you with those because I could just go on for hours on this, and I don't want to. So I'll conclude by going over some things to know if you do choose to shoot a TLR, which you should. Most of them are fixed lenses, meaning you cannot change them. There are some notable exceptions, like the Mamiya C series, which have sort of lens boards and bellows. They're actually very similar, now that I'm thinking about it, to the very first TLR that I described at the beginning of the episode. I don't own one of those. I don't really have any interest in owning one of those, but they're out there if you want one. They're very expensive. I think they're a bit overrated, but that's my opinion. I've never really felt limited, really, by any of the lenses on my TLRs here. So I wouldn't really consider that to be a detriment. Now, another thing is filter mounting. The earlier TLRs tend to have either slip-over filters, like wedge fit, or screw-on filters. But the real famous cameras, like the Rolleiflex automats, like my K4A here, they have what's called a bayonet fitting. And the front of the lens, usually both lenses, but sometimes only just the taking lens, they have a little bayonet connector, and you could put a lens shade on, you could put filters, you could put accessory lenses, and I'll get to that in a second, on them, and it's a really neat way to just connect it. You give it a quarter twist, and it just goes on. It's pretty neat. So mind you, if you get one of these TLRs and it has a bayonet fitting on it, on the front, you can get different filters, lens shades, whatever you want for them, and that's definitely an option open to you. Now, I just mentioned accessory lenses. Well, I also mentioned that most TLRs don't have interchangeable lenses. You see, they did manufacture for a number of years lenses, accessory lenses, that would bayonet on over the standard fitted lens, and it would either make the lens wider field of view or a narrower field of view. I have one of these. It fits my Minolta autocord. It's a certain look to it. It feels kind of chintzy, in all admission, but honestly, like I said, I haven't shot the autocord, so I couldn't tell you what it looks like. The general consensus on that is that the accessory lens kind of is a detriment to the original optical design of the fitted lens, because the lens wasn't designed to do that. And again, I just say, in my opinion, I mean, do whatever you want, but in my opinion, I would just stick with whatever lens is fitted to your camera. Most of these are Tessar designs or triplet designs, and they just really hold up. They really do, and they're just very sharp, very nice character to them. And go ahead, use your foot zoom. If you want to get something wider, back up. If you want to get something close, move up. So that's what I say. But anyway, I've been going on for 50 minutes now. I'll start to wrap this up. So we went over history, a little bit of TLRs. I went over a bunch of TLRs that I have right next to me. The explanations, layouts. I guarantee that I missed a lot of stuff, but I'm just scatterbrained anyway, so I'm not really gonna bother with that. We went over why you should get a TLR, some idiosyncrasies to deal with, and yeah, I'll conclude by saying go out and buy one. They really are a lot of fun. If you want to, I sound like a sappy YouTuber when I say if you want to take your photography to a new level, get a TLR. But I, they're not wrong. Um, in just the fact that each camera that you hold has a different personality. TLRs definitely do have a personality to them, and like I said, they just make you want to shoot. So if you're feeling you want a rejuvenation of your creative juices, so whatever you call them, get a TLR. You know what? You can find them for really cheap. I haven't paid more than I think $100 for any of my roll eyes even. So yeah, those are the top of the line ones. So if you know where to look and you're comfortable with a little bit of camera repair yourself, you can get them for well under $100. People just don't want a lot of these, especially the older ones. Go ahead, get an EcoFlex. Like I said, they're equal quality to the roll eyes, but people don't pay as much for them because they don't have the roll eye name. A lot of times on the roll eyes, you're paying for the name because it's a luxury brand. Um, so yeah, go out, get a roll eye flex, get an EcoFlex, get a roll eye cord, get a Zero Flex. Definitely, those are a bit cheaper, especially in America. Still well built. And go ahead, get these old cameras, put them back into service, keep them going. It makes me happy at least, if that means anything to you. But I'm just some guy making a podcast, so whatever. What does my opinion mean? So get a TLR. Signing off for the Camera Compendium podcast, episode 1. Again, this is September 14th, 2023. Goodbye.